Welcome, dear listener, to a deeper, more immersive exploration of Jane Austen's insightful world. Today, we expand our journey into the heart of Sense and Sensibility, a tale of two sisters, their contrasting natures, their trials of love, and their ultimate pursuit of happiness amidst the intricate societal constraints of Regency England. It's a story that masterfully and with great nuance weighs the merits of reasoned judgment against the compelling impulses of a passionate heart. Our story opens, as you may recall, with the Dashwood family of Norland Park in Sussex. The recent death of Mr. Henry Dashwood sets in motion a chain of events that will irrevocably alter the lives of his second wife and their three daughters, Elinor, Marianne, and young Margaret. As was the custom, Norland Park, a considerable estate, passes directly to John Dashwood, Mr. Dashwood's son from his first marriage. This leaves Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters in a precarious financial position, with only a modest income to sustain them and the pressing need to secure a new home. John Dashwood, on his father's deathbed, had solemnly promised to look after his stepmother and half-sisters. He was a man of generally good intentions, but possessed a lamentable weakness of character, easily swayed by those around him, most notably his wife, Fanny. Fanny Dashwood was a woman of impressive avarice and a deeply ingrained snobbery, with swift and subtle manipulation playing upon John's anxieties about his own son's future inheritance and the perceived imprudence of generosity. She convinces him that his promise to his father amounted to very little in practical terms. Thus, the Dashwood women are left to navigate their reduced circumstances with scant assistance from the new master of Norland. Before this painful departure, however, a delicate and unspoken affection begins to blossom between the eldest daughter, Elinor, and Fanny's own brother, Edward Ferrars. Edward, unlike the more flamboyant figures of the era, was a young man of quiet disposition, inherently kind, and possessing a sincerity that Elinor, with her keen perception, found deeply appealing. He was not conventionally handsome, nor did he possessed the sparkling wit that might captivate a more romantic or superficial fancy. Indeed, Marianne often found him wanting in artistic enthusiasm, but Elinor recognized in him a solid understanding and an unpretentious goodness. Their conversations were gentle, their connection built on shared values rather than overt declarations. Yet Fanny, ever watchful of her family's status, perceived this budding attachment with sharp disapproval. An alliance with the now impoverished, Elinor Dashwood was, in her view, far beneath her brother Edward, who she believed was destined for a much more advantageous match. Her subtle, and sometimes not so subtle interventions cast a shadow over Elinor's quiet hopes. Forced to leave the only home they had ever known, Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters accept the generous offer of a distant cousin, Sir John Middleton. He provides them with Barton Cottage, a modest but picturesque dwelling on his estate in Devonshire. Here, surrounded by new landscapes and a different social circle, they must forge a new life, adjusting to their diminished means and altered social standing. Our two elder sisters, Elinor and Marianne, whose fortunes we follow most closely, are a study in contrasts, the living embodiments of the novel's title. Elinor, at 19, possesses a strength of understanding and a coolness of judgment that often makes her the de facto counselor to her more impulsive mother. She represents sense. Her feelings are strong, her heart affectionate, but she has learned the discipline of governing her emotions, of prioritizing propriety and the comfort of others, often at the expense of her own peace of mind. She observes the world with a keen eye and a quiet wit, her stoicism a shield against the disappointments life invariably brings. Marianne, 17 and all vibrant sensibility, is the antithesis of her elder sister. She is passionate, eager, in all her pursuits and believes that sorrows and joys should be experienced and expressed with unrestrained intensity. To conceal one's feelings is, in Marianne's eyes, a form of insincerity. She scorns moderation, idolizes romantic ideals, and longs for a love that mirrors the grand, consuming passions found in her beloved books of poetry and romance. Her beauty is striking, her talents considerable, but her impetuous nature often leads her to disregard societal conventions and, indeed, Elinor's gentle warnings. At Barton Park, Sir John Middleton, a jovial and hospitable country squire, and his more reserved wife, Lady Middleton, welcome the Dashwoods into their circle. This circle includes Mrs. Jennings, Lady Middleton's mother, a kind-hearted, if somewhat vulgar, and incorrigibly matchmaking widow. It is here that the sisters encounter two men who will profoundly shape their romantic destinies. Colonel Brandon, a close friend of Sir John, is a man of 35, grave in manner, and carrying an air of quiet melancholy. He is a decorated officer, a man of honor and established fortune, master of the nearby estate of Delaford. From their very first meeting, he is visibly struck by Marianne Dashwood, by her beauty, her expressive animation, and perhaps even by a resemblance to a lost love from his own past. His attentions, however, are understated, his admiration conveyed through quiet observation and acts of thoughtful consideration. Marianne, blinded by her romantic preconceptions, sees him merely as an old bachelor, too solemn and too advanced in years to be an object of romantic interest. She dismisses his quiet regard, sometimes with a youthful lack of consideration that pains Elinor. Then, in a manner befitting a romantic novel, John Willoughby bursts into their lives. During a walk in the hills above Barton, Marianne, running heedlessly down a steep slope in the rain, takes a fall and sprains her ankle. Willoughby, out with his dogs and gun, happens upon the scene and, with effortless charm and strength, carries the injured Marianne back to Barton Cottage. He is young, handsome, impeccably stylish, and possessed of an irresistible vivacity. He speaks with passion about poetry, music, and nature, all the subjects dearest to Marianne's heart. A whirlwind romance ensues. Willoughby becomes a near constant visitor at the cottage, his attentions to Marianne so open and particular that everyone, including the hopeful Mrs. Dashwood and Marianne herself, believes them to be secretly engaged. They share intimate conversations, exchange meaningful glances, and he even procures a lock of her hair. Marianne, swept away by what she perceives as a perfect union of souls, surrenders her heart completely, flouting societal decorum and Elinor's gentle admonitions about prudence and discretion. Elinor, ever observant, notes a certain recklessness in Willoughby, a disregard for convention that, while charming to Marianne, raises a flicker of unease in her own more cautious mind. Elinor, meanwhile, carries her own quiet anxieties. News from Norland is infrequent, and Edward Ferrars's long silence is troubling. When he does pay a brief, rather unexpected visit to Barton Cottage, his manner is strangely constrained, his spirits low. He seems ill at ease, and though his affection for Elinor appears undiminished in her eyes, a shadow hangs over their interactions, leaving Elinor to ponder its cause with a heavy heart. The idyllic interlude of Marianne's romance is brutally curtailed. One morning, Willoughby arrives at the cottage in a state of agitation. He announces, with little preamble, that his wealthy aunt and benefactress, Mrs. Smith of Allenham Court, upon whom his future prospects depend, is sending him to London on urgent business. His departure is immediate, his future return uncertain. He leaves Marianne utterly devastated, bewildered by the suddenness of his departure and the vagueness of his explanations, offering her no formal commitment, no clear promise that might sustain her through the separation. Soon after Willoughby's departure, the Dashwoods receive other visitors at Barton, Miss Lucy Steele and her elder sister Anne. Lucy is a cousin of Mrs. Jennings, a young woman whose prettiness is offset by a certain commonness of manner and a shrewd, calculating eye. It is Lucy who delivers a blow to Elinor that tests her fortitude to its very limits. In a private conversation, laden with false professions of friendship and an undercurrent of sly triumph, Lucy confides in Elinor the great secret of her life. She has been secretly engaged to Mr. Edward Ferrars for 4 years. The engagement, she explains, was formed when they were both much younger, during a visit Edward made to his uncle near Plymouth. It was an imprudent youthful attachment, one that Edward, a man of scrupulous honour, now felt bound to uphold, despite the evident lack of current deep affection and the vast disparity in their social standing and intellectual compatibility. Lucy, fully aware of Elinor's own regard for Edward, a regard she likely suspects is reciprocated, takes a certain malicious pleasure in imparting this news, watching for Elinor's reaction. Elinor is thunderstruck. The news extinguishes her dearest hopes, plunging her into a depth of private sorrow she has never before known. Yet, with almost superhuman self-control, she masters her emotions. She listens to Lucy's lengthy, often self-congratulatory account with outward composure, offering polite, if brief, responses. She betrays nothing of her own heartbreak, determined not to give Lucy the satisfaction of witnessing her pain, nor to burden her family with her own troubles. This internal battle, this silent endurance of profound disappointment while maintaining a facade of calm, becomes Elinor's greatest trial. She is forced to listen to Lucy speak of Edward as her own, to hear of his family's disapproval of their match, and to offer advice when solicited, all while her own heart is breaking. This is the true test of her sense, a powerful, disciplined restraint born not of coldness, but of a profound sense of duty and consideration for others. The well-meaning Mrs. Jennings, ever eager for company and matchmaking, invites Elinor and Marianne to accompany her to London for the winter season. Marianne, despite her sorrow over Willoughby, agrees with a flutter of renewed hope. Surely in London she will encounter her beloved Willoughby and their separation will end. Elinor, foreseeing only further distress for her sister and a continuation of her own silent suffering in Lucy Steele's company, who is also to be in town, accepts with reluctance, chiefly for Marianne's sake. London proves to be a crucible of painful experiences. Marianne writes several impassioned letters to Willoughby, but receives no reply. Her anxiety and despair grow with each passing day. Then, at a crowded assembly, they encounter him. Marianne, overjoyed, rushes towards him, only to be met with a look of cold surprise and a distant, formal greeting. He is clearly in attendance with another lady. The public humiliation is acute, and Marianne is overcome with grief, forced to leave the ball in a state of near collapse. The following morning brings the final crushing blow. A letter arrives from Willoughby addressed to Marianne. It is a masterpiece of cold formality in which he denies any past engagement, expresses regret if his attentions were ever misinterpreted, and informs her of his imminent marriage to a Miss Sophia Gray, a young woman of considerable fortune. £50,000, the gossips whisper. He even returns Marianne's previous letters and the cherished lock of her hair. Marianne's despair is absolute. She succumbs entirely to her grief, weeping incessantly, refusing comfort, and making her misery a public spectacle, much to Elinor's distress and Mrs. Jennings's concerned clucking. It is during this period of intense suffering for Marianne that Colonel Brandon, also in London, feels compelled to reveal to Elinor the true, darker side of John Willoughby's character. With quiet pain, he recounts a story from his own past. Years ago, he had loved a young woman named Eliza, who was forced into an unhappy marriage with his own elder brother. After her miserable marriage ended in divorce and disgrace, she fell into poverty. Colonel Brandon found her dying and took responsibility for her illegitimate daughter, also named Eliza. This younger Eliza, his ward, grew into a beautiful but vulnerable young woman, and it was this girl, barely 17, whom John Willoughby had seduced and then callously abandoned when she became pregnant, leaving her destitute and heartbroken. This revelation, made to explain Willoughby's desperate need for a wealthy marriage, as his aunt, Mrs. Smith, had disinherited him upon discovering this affair, paints Willoughby not as a victim of circumstance, but as a calculating libertine, capable of profound cruelty and deceit. Elinor is horrified by this account, both for the sake of the unfortunate Miss Williams and for the light it sheds on the man her sister had so ardently loved. While it offers no comfort to Marianne's immediate pain, it begins the slow process of disillusionment. The strain of these events, coupled with Marianne's unrelenting public grief and a reckless, solitary walk in a heavy downpour near Cleveland, the Palmers' country estate where they stop on their journey home, leads to disaster. Marianne falls gravely ill with a putrid fever, her life hanging precariously in the balance. For many anxious days and nights, Elinor nurses her sister with unwavering devotion, fearing the worst. The local apothecary offers little hope, and Elinor, in desperation, sends Colonel Brandon, who had followed them to Cleveland out of concern, to fetch their mother from Barton. His swift and compassionate execution of this errand further underscores his deep and selfless love for Marianne. During the long, anxious watches by Marianne's sickbed, Elinor's own strength is tested to its limits, and Marianne, in her moments of lucidity, and during her slow convalescence, undergoes a profound internal transformation. Faced with her own mortality and witnessing Elinor's quiet, uncomplaining fortitude in the face of multiple sorrows, Marianne begins to see the folly of her own unrestrained emotionalism. She recognizes the danger of her excessive sensibility, the pain it has caused herself and others, and the immense, quiet strength of her sister's character. She learns to value Elinor's sense, not as coldness, but as a profound capacity for endurance and self-command rooted in love. Meanwhile, the affairs of Edward Ferrars and Lucy Steele reach their own crisis. The secret of their long engagement finally becomes public, largely through the indiscretion of Lucy's sister, Anne. Edward's mother, the formidable and wealthy Mrs. Ferrars, is incandescent with rage. She had grand plans for Edward, involving a marriage to the Honourable Miss Morton and her substantial fortune. She commands Edward to break his engagement with the penniless, and in her eyes, wholly unsuitable Lucy Steele. Edward, though he no longer loves Lucy, and clearly feels a deep affection for Elinor, is a man of his word, bound by what he considers a point of honour. However ill-judged the original commitment, he refuses to jilt Lucy. As a result, Mrs. Ferrars, true to her threats, disinherits him completely, settling her fortune instead on his younger, more pliable, and far more foppish brother, Robert Ferrars. Edward is left with virtually nothing. Upon hearing of Edward's honourable conduct and his resulting impoverishment, Colonel Brandon, in an act of quiet generosity that further reveals his admirable character, offers Edward the modest clerical living of Delaford Parish. This would provide Edward with a small but sufficient income to marry Lucy, should she still wish it, once he is ordained. As Marianne slowly regains her health, her spirit too undergoes a period of healing and quiet growth. She and Elinor return to the familiar tranquility of Barton Cottage, both profoundly changed by their London experiences. Marianne, no longer the impetuous, demanding romantic, has developed a new appreciation for domestic peace and the steady affections of those who truly care for her. Her esteem for Colonel Brandon, who had shown such unwavering devotion and quiet kindness throughout her trials, begins to deepen into something warmer and more profound. She sees past his reserved exterior to the noble, feeling heart within. Her earlier romantic ideals, shattered by Willoughby's betrayal, are replaced by a more mature understanding of what constitutes lasting happiness and true worth in a partner. Then one day, a servant brings startling news from the nearby town. He has seen Miss Steele and her new husband, and she is now Mrs. Ferrars. The Dashwoods, and particularly Elinor, brace themselves for the inevitable confirmation that Edward and Lucy have finally married. Elinor, who has borne so much with such quiet dignity, prepares for this last, painful severance of her hopes. But soon after, Edward Ferrars himself arrives at Barton Cottage, looking agitated and uncertain. The truth he reveals is astonishing. It was not he, but his brother Robert Ferrars, now the heir to the family fortune, who had married Lucy Steele. Lucy, ever the pragmatist, upon learning of Edward's disinheritance and Robert's sudden elevation, had swiftly and skillfully transferred her affections, or rather her ambitions, to the wealthier brother, securing for herself a far more advantageous match and freeing Edward from their long, unhappy engagement. Edward, finally released from his burdensome commitment, is now at liberty to declare his true feelings. With heartfelt emotion, he confesses his long-standing love for Elinor, a love that had been overshadowed by his sense of duty to Lucy, but had never truly wavered. He explains the misery of his entanglement, his admiration for Elinor's character, and his despair at the thought of losing her. Elinor, whose sense had for so long held her deep sensibility in check, is overcome. The relief and joy are almost too much to bear. After years of silent suffering and patient endurance, her constancy is rewarded. They become engaged, their happiness all the more precious for the trials they have overcome. They plan to marry and live at the Delaford parsonage provided by Colonel Brandon. Marianne, witnessing her sister's profound happiness, rejoices sincerely. Her own journey towards emotional maturity continues, and her appreciation for Colonel Brandon's steadfast character and gentle love grows daily. She comes to realize that her youthful infatuation with Willoughby was a flight of fancy, whereas the Colonel offers a love that is deep, true, and enduring. In time, her esteem and gratitude blossom into a sincere and tender affection. Marianne Dashwood, once the devotee of passionate, unrestrained romance, finds her lasting happiness in a union built on mutual respect, shared values, and a quiet, growing love with the Honourable Colonel Brandon. They marry, and the two sisters, Elinor of Sense and Marianne of Sensibility, find themselves living as neighbours, their lives and families closely intertwined, each having found a path to happiness that honours both the head and the heart. Before these happy resolutions are fully settled, John Willoughby, hearing of Marianne's dangerous illness and perhaps pricked by a vestige of conscience, makes an unexpected and dramatic visit to Cleveland while Elinor is there alone. He seeks to explain himself to palliate his conduct. He confesses that he had genuinely loved Marianne, that his actions were driven by his dire financial situation, having been disinherited by Mrs. Smith after his affair with Eliza Williams was discovered, and the societal pressure to marry for money. He expresses regret and acknowledges his own wretchedness, even admitting his new wife, Miss Grey, does not make him happy. Elinor listens with a mixture of pity and censure. While his confession reveals him to be less a cold-hearted villain and more a weak, morally compromised man, it does little to excuse his cruelty to Marianne. It does, however, provide a final closure, allowing both sisters to move forward with a clearer understanding of the past. And so Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility draws to its close. It is a rich and deeply satisfying novel that explores the complexities of human emotion, the pressures of society, and the winding paths to love and contentment. It reminds us that while deep feelings and romantic passions are an undeniable part of the human experience, they must be tempered and guided by reason, prudence, and a thoughtful consideration for the well-being of ourselves and others. True happiness, Austen masterfully illustrates, is found not in the slavish adherence to either extreme of sense or sensibility, but in achieving a delicate, harmonious balance between the two. It is a story that champions integrity over artifice, enduring affection over fleeting infatuation, and the quiet triumph of character in a world that often values surface appearances far too highly.